Jess, we just got a large rush delivery of sweet clover. Is there something I should know about? Oh my!
Gophers.
Blue gophers?
They are all mascots for the Go language. There was some sort of convention.
A Go convention?
No, a language mascot convention. You just missed the herd of elephants representing PHP.
That must have been a sight.
Is your rodent allergy acting up?
What was your first hint? Check that box of allergy medicine. Can I take it with coffee?
It says the season of the Bug Hunters Cafe is made possible by Soporific and Municipal Media.
No, the box, not the note attached to it.
Sorry.
This is a lot of blue gophers.
Oops, mind the rust crabs.
I hope the pythons behave themselves with all these rodents.
So far, no problems. In any case, I wonder how the gophers are going to react to our guest today, the author of Manning's Learn Go with Pocket-Sized Projects, Aliénor Latour, Donia Chaiehloudj, and Pascal Bertrand.
Speaking of which, hey, we're over here.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to our humble cafe. We have everything imaginable and unimaginable. Feel free to order anything.
Yeah, can I get you anything?
I think I will get a cascara-based kombucha if you have that.
Okay.
I would get coffee with chai spices, please.
All right. Ooh.
Can I get a blue tea with some grapefruit taste in it, please?
Okay. Yeah. We actually have a fresh shipment of blue tea, so that works. And Boyan, your usual cappuccino without any coffee, or espresso without any coffee?
Yes, and just ask the barista to add just a dash of rainbow.
Yes, just a dash. Remember the time they put too much in there, and that was quite spicy.
Absolutely. We don't want a repeat of that.
No, absolutely not. I will get that, and I'll be right back. We're at the big table today, so I'll have a seat. I'll be right back.
So, welcome here. And I have a bunch of questions. First question is, how did you manage to write the book, all three of you? I once tried to do that with my brother, and we figured out we couldn't use the same pen at the same time. It went horribly. So, did you use two pens, or how did it go?
It's a bit of a... I answered the first one, and someone else can answer your next question. It's a process where we all work, sometimes in different parts, sometimes in the same part, but we all agree that someone is writing and the other ones are either reading or dictating. So we are not using the same pen at the same time.
We are also writing the code together. We're mobbing for the code parts. One of us is writing the code, another is driving, and the third is taking notes on what's going on. And then we try to write the texts asynchronously, because that's the new thing, right? Async.
Wow, they're fast today. I've got your orders actually right here. So they marked them out. So Donia, Aliénor, Pascal, Boyan, and of course my caramel macchiato. So it's a lot easier to hear at a distance today when it's just gophers because all the conversation's near the ground. So basically, you wrote a book about a language which was created for concurrently.
Correct.
And I also have a follow-up question. How did you handle any exception during your work?
Comments. A lot of comments.
We tried to recover from anything bad happening,
Don't panic.
Bring your towel.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us, what is the most interesting thing about writing book? with 3 authors? Because I never saw that.
To me, the most interesting thing is all the time you spend looking up stuff so that you don't write nonsense. And one of the chapters is a money converter. And I spent way too much time looking up currencies, how they work, how they don't work, and the weird stuff you can find all over the world, like currencies without any cents, currencies where the cent is actually a fifth. And then it goes into a Wikipedia loop of all currencies and the non-decimal currencies and all of that, which is absolutely not a Go subject, but you have to know that because you don't want to be writing something where someone's going to say, this is wrong.
Oh my gosh, yes. Even writing a book alone, I can say that's... Can't tell you how many Wikipedia holes I fell into. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I had to corner a real estate agent at church and just say, how do MLS numbers work in real estate listings in the U.S. just to understand, that for, even though the MLS is just going to show up in this little tiny part of the example, it's like, okay, what is an MLS number? How does it work? How is it structured? I had to get all that information for writing the example because you're going to have that one person who's a subject matter expert in something and real estate, and they're going to be going, you got it wrong.
I think my favorite part of writing a book, well, first of all, I've never written a book alone, so I'm not going to compare writing a book with other people to writing a book alone, but I will describe my best experience of writing a book with 2 people I really know and appreciate. That is that even though we've been working in the same company for some years and we have worked in common with the same standards, we now no longer work in the same company and we have different standards. And one of us likes to do something this way and another one likes to do something another way. And this means we get to discover new things that we would never discover if we were just working in one company. So you can think it about just like open source. You work with people who have different standards, but you have to commit to one standard at the end for the book. But it's not going to be your standards every time. On top of that, we have a technical editor who is also someone from a different company, and he has his standards, and then we have to work on the book together, and then we submit our work to him, and he makes comments, and sometimes the comments are, well, I wouldn't do that. This is not the best design or something else, and we have to take this comment into our input. So yeah, this is the part I really like, where you do something, you can do it. Right, hello world, okay, we can all do it. But which twists are wrote by people who work in different environments as yours? Yeah, that's my experience. What's yours, Donia?
I would say that I cannot compare also, because I would never, I think, write a book alone. But being with my best friends, writing a book, and in general, like having a project, having like a baby together and like growing it together is very enriching for me. I've been also always the junior in the team, so I'm always learning from them as mentors also, like not only about Go, but how you design, how you think code, what questions are you going to ask to yourself, what kind of decision are you going to take, which is the most important part for me, like writing the code. And about like writing the core of the chapters and the text, I would say that I'm more about like learning how to write English. Aliénor and Pascal are really great writers, and yeah, I think so. And so I'm learning at the same time how to write in English, since it's not my native language. So this is the best part of writing a book for me.
What is your native language?
It is French.
Yeah, me too.
And me too, but my mother tongue is not French. My mother's tongue is English.
And tell me, how does writing in French differ from writing in English?
Are you talking about technical books? Because writing or even speaking technical in French is weird because all of the vocabulary is in English. So you have to put it into the French sentences, but if you use it with an English accent, then you sound weird. But it's like, yeah, anyone whose native language is not English will understand. If you're trying to talk tech, it's going to be weird.
Yeah, unfortunately, programming languages did not translate. So it's easy to write a book and translate it, like you write Alice in Wonderland and then you can translate it. But if you write some code in Python or Go or C++, and you translate the code to someone else's language, if is going to stay if. No one's translating if. No one wrote a C++ compiler using French words. Well, at least not that I know of. It would be a great project. Maybe we should do this for Go, but it would be... I mean...
What is the French word for go? For the motion, for the action?
Aller. To go is aller. Or go, as in an injunction, would be va, which is also the verb aller, but French is complicated.
So, you're going to write a language called Ali, then?
Maybe not.
It would be interesting, though. Yeah, I haven't seen any languages written in anything other than English. So you hear things like, "Oh, this language is written in human language. It's so easy. You just like you hear about Python all the time. Oh, and all the keywords are it's in English." And I guess I hadn't ever really thought before, being an English speaker, I'd never really thought before that, yeah, that's not necessarily helpful if you don't speak English. That's, if anything, maybe harder than a language that's more symbolic.
At French computer school, they teach you like programming language and then how to write abstract programs with keywords. So you've got a while keyword and a for keyword and an if keyword. These would be in French because you're just writing the design of the program. But when it comes to coding the thing, you have this, okay, this is what I want to implement on the left, but it's in French. I need to translate that into English because, who names their variables with French words or anything else? You want to share. You don't share your program, and the only way to do this is to make it understandable by everyone. And that is, unfortunately, English, or unfortunately, fortunately. At least we have the standard, which is one language.
But in PHP, there's actually this double colon thing that's called in with a Hebrew name, Paramayim Nekodotayim, because the people who invented that were from Israel, I guess. So the constant when you get an error and there's no compiler. When your script gets an error, you have this long word, which is Hebrew. But who speaks PHP now, right?
Oh, actually, quite a few people. It's still got a very strong market position. PHP is not dead. Ask the elephant over there in the corner.
Tell us more about Go. Myself, I'm a Python programmer, and I worked a little bit in PHP and JavaScript, and that scared me away from other languages. So why should somebody like me use Go? And avoid mentioning the mascot, because you do have a cuter mascot than us in Python.
And I'll add in there, I'm a C++ and Python developer, so I kind of come from the other end of having total control over the system, C++ and C.
I think, well, if I'm not going to mention the absolutely cute mascot, then I will have to speak about something else. But I think Go, first of all, if you want to try it, it's fairly easy. There's a website, the Tour of Go, where you learn Go step by step, the basics, how to write a function, how to declare a variable, how to return a value, how to catch errors. And that's online, so you don't have to install anything. You just go online, Tour of Go, do the Tour of Go. It's 10 pages, takes 1 hour maximum, something like that. I'm not going to set you standouts, but at least you have an idea that in 1 hour you can discover the language. And then when you want to use it, Go comes with a lot of tools. So as someone who came from the C++ universe and entered the world of Go, Go has its own packet manager. So you don't need to say, oh, I need to remember to include this path, finds in this path. Go does that for me. So I find it very useful. The compiler itself, I've never used it with any extra fancy options. So I've never done -03, -04, -00 if I wanted to. But the compiler is not the only tool. It comes with a formatter, so everyone writes the same Go. There's no one that uses tabs and someone else would use spaces. There's a linter provided by the tool, and there's a vector of your code.
Also for testing.
Yeah, there's a testing tool which is extremely... The whole package of Go comes with a lot of great, amazing tools that make it very simple to work with Go, in my opinion.
So I would also like to add the community, because there's a very friendly community, inclusive. When you go to ask questions on the Gophers Slack, then people are always nice. And the GopherCon, which is happening in Berlin this year, GopherCon Europe, you go there and everyone's kind of friendly and everything, and no one's looking at you like, what are you doing here? I'm better than you. Like, I've had this experience before, and I like Go for this as well.
I would like to add also two things. The first one is that Go was my first language in my professional career. So it was actually very simple to catch, and I could focus more on the business of what I was writing instead of like struggling with the syntax and all this stuff. So that was, I feel it's really interesting when you're also starting, even though I studied like C and C++ during my studies before. And the second thing is that you can actually program IoT with TinyGo, which is written in Go and taking the standard libraries and like making it available for just writing and programming for IoT and for hardware, which is actually really cool also.
So you're talking about the community and you're talking about the language, and I'm noticing some similarities. And I think I pointed this out in previous conversations, that Conway's Law sometimes runs in reverse. Conway's Law being that organizations' design systems mirror their communication structure, 4-part team, 4-pass compiler. So Go is a very concurrency-focused language, very collaborative in that regard, thinking about multiple processes, multiple workers involved in things. And it sounds like a very collaborative community. Obviously, the three of you just wrote a book, together, three of you concurrently. And do you see a lot of those parallels kind of between the language and the community? Is the language as friendly as the community is?
I would say yes. But ultimately, I would say that choosing a language is like a religion. You pick what you believe in. You want something simple and clear to read. You pick Go. You want something that with a lot of ecosystem. You pick, Java or Kotlin. So having this kind of which language is the best conversation is not leading anywhere at the end. So that goes in the way of, Conway's Law applies to languages. In the sense that if you pick this language, then you have this mindset.
Something else maybe about the community, most of Go code exists on GitHub or GitLab or somewhere, because that's how Go works. You say, I want to use that external provider's code, and you use it. Go does not provide any compiled libraries. It comes with source code that you compile on your site.
One thing I've learned in talking to people in all these different languages and language communities and learning different languages is that every language has its one thing. Like, languages have many things that they're good at and they prioritize things differently, but every language seems to have its one central tenet around which everything is hung. With C++, it's memory management. With Rust, it's borrowing. With C#, it's inversion of control. With Python, it's introspection. What is Go's thing? What is the central concept of the language that everything else ultimately has to either accommodate or be subservient to?
Could it be the simplicity? You want everything to be clear for the maintainer. So, it has to be fast, short, and easy to maintain. I think that when I'm writing Go code, I'm thinking more of me in 6 months when I'll have to maintain this thing and it has to make sense, or anyone else, but usually it's yourself. And many of the decisions I make for the design of the architecture of the code are around this maintainability. I don't know if it's Go or if it's me.
No, that's good. I pick, and it's the same train of thought, I think maybe I'd pick one of the paradigms of Go is that errors are values, and that's how Go deals with anything bad happening. Anything bad happening is not something bad happening, it's just something happening, and you have to deal with it. Every nil point exception is an opportunity to recover, basically, in Go. And instead of having errors thrown out and exceptions, you just return errors and you handle them properly without crashing midway through. That's my take on Go. You use errors, and that's fine to use errors. It's not a bad thing to have an error. It's a bad thing if you do not deal with an error.
Because life is messy, right?
Sure is.
Things happen.
And so it's basically a part of designing your code to gracefully handle exceptional circumstances.
Yes, but also they're not exceptional. They can happen. And it's not, this line is never going to be executed, or this case will never happen. I will never open a file that does not exist. The file might not exist. What do you do when it doesn't exist? Instead of considering that it's never going to happen, just write 2 lines or 3 lines, and then it's handled. And it's never going to break.
Interesting. So it's not, so where languages like C++ view it as an error, something to be avoided and to be punished, and Python views it as something to be embraced, but it's exceptional as opposed to the happy path, Go just views it all as part of effectively the happy path. Is that why Go is so happy? Because everything is part of the happy path.
We don't have any exceptions. Yeah, maybe. Ghost functions can return several values, so that makes it simpler to handle with unusual cases.
Interesting. So you just mentioned something interesting then, that Go can return several possible values. Obviously, there's other languages like Python that can do that as well, although once you get into things like type annotation, that gets complex. So what's the typing system look like in Go? Like what is Go's relationship to what a thing is versus what a thing does, or does it not even matter?
It's extremely typed. Everything has to define its own type. You don't infer a lot. Like everything is explicit, and when you define a variable, it has a type and it won't change, contrary to some scripting languages.
Like Python, we embrace the change.
We define things, and I don't know how to say it.
Well, Go is a combined language.
Yeah, yes. Your variables are tightly coupled. Python has names and values which are loosely connected, so a name has scope and no type, and a value has a type and no scope, and you can draw any number of connections between names and values. But it sounds like Go, being a compiled language, is more along the lines of you're strictly typed, you're deciding your type at the beginning is a little more traditional in that regard. Would that be accurate?
Many people consider it a C-based language because many things are like C in that regard.
Yeah, for me, as I got better at programming, I discovered I love typing much more than untyped. So I'm always using type annotation in Python, and I wish there was an option to tell to runtime enforce this, because a bunch of times when I find some error and bug in Python, it's because somebody decided instead of string, I'll return Boolean value or something interesting like that. But you don't have that problem. For me, I think it was around the time when it was announced, and I was still just a foolish little programmer junior. We made fun of Go because it didn't have exceptions. And we were like, how can you write a programming language without exception? But now, talking to you, it does make sense to handle everything with errors on place where they're happening instead of let's just throw exception and go on.
Yeah, I quite agree with that. Errors being values means that they're part of the path that you actually test, and they're part of what you think about when you're writing your code. Not just thinking of the happy path, you're thinking of all of the edge cases. So sometimes it's not an edge, just like half the same.
Yeah, so if you don't want to deal with an error, you explicitly ignore it, but that's an explicit thing you do in the code. You don't check the error, but it's returned. You cannot just ignore the fact that it returns an error.
That sounds incredibly time-saving in terms of debugging later.
Well, this also means that most of the Go lines, every Go program has the same line written all over the place, which is my return error nil or not? And this happens a lot of, every program has that everywhere.
And does that fill you with joy or sadness?
I like it.
Good answer. Yeah, I also like it because you know what you're doing. You have to explicitly think about it. You can't just forget about it when you're writing this if error is not nil.
Even though it comes from the Zen of Python, the two of the phrases from that are coming to mind, because I think Zen of Python isn't just for Python. It's a pretty good guiding star for a lot for code and good healthy code in many languages. And two of the things you just touched on were errors should never pass silently unless explicitly silenced, and explicit is better than implicit. Explicit is always better than implicit in my mind. When I was working in C#, I was working with someone that wanted to do implicit typing for all of the different variables. When they're instantiating the variable, they just wanted to auto everything. And it made me very uncomfortable. He's like, well, it's just going to save time. I said, no, it's not going to save time. It's saving time. It's saving you typing 3 or 4 characters, but it's not going to save time because you're throwing away valuable context that could save you debugging time later. It's, maybe we can get away with it if you're saying I don't mind doing it if it's auto foo equals new my fancy object this subtype. I'm okay with that because you see in the line what it is. But there was a lot of cases where it was auto and then it was just calling some function and the whole context was gone, was lost on what was actually being stored. And that's always made me uncomfortable in any language when we lose that context of what is it that we're actually expecting here? Because bugs hide in those corners.
I guess it's the same thing I was saying about maintainers in the future. So, maintainers from the future, because when you're thinking about the errors, then you're also thinking about who's going to debug this in a few months and try to make sense of it.
You're much better than me. You said in 6 months when I look at this.
Oh, tomorrow. Yeah, I was trying to be kind. Yeah.
Yeah, in 4 days when I look at the code I wrote, that was some other person who I absolutely do not understand. So I always have to write it as clean as possible because I know next time I'm going to completely forget everything about that. And one thing about Jason now mentioned saving time by not typing the variables. I usually see people not writing tests because it's much faster to program without tests. And when you try to change that code or even worse, maintain it, as I worked on a couple of projects, not having tests is a nightmare.
It's something that I learned from the book, when writing the code with Pascal and Aliénor, actually. We began the Hello World, the first project of the book, by writing tests on the output. And it was my first time writing this kind of test. In Go, you can have example main, the name of the function you want to test, and check the output. And it was just checking the println of the hello world, but we were testing it. And from the people reviewing the book and the one that read from the MIP, they really appreciated the fact that it was not only a hello world, but that we were testing from the beginning.
So we're teaching how to write the code and how to test it. It's one process throughout the entire book.
I know it. I've never made this many clover macchiatos in one day before. Well, thank you for helping serve.
The pythons want another round of egg smoothies.
I'll get that. Bug Hunters Café, this is Annie. No, I'm afraid our meeting rooms are all full up right now. Gophers. Sorry about that. Bye-bye.
Uh-oh, here come the purr camels.
So, tell me, how did you get to writing this book?
It's a long story, but it's an interesting one. About 2 years ago, we decided that we wanted to find new positions in several new places, and I am not a social media person. I am everything but that. So I had to not update, just write my LinkedIn profile, and I used Donia's help for that. So thank you again, Donia. And when you update your LinkedIn profile, maybe, or I suppose, it goes through the scanners from the recruiters, and I then got a lot of messages from recruiters saying, "Oh, you code and go, that's great. We have huge opportunities for you. Do you want to work with us?" And eventually I found a position which I was interested in, but even though I had found a position, then the messages on LinkedIn kept incoming, and I was not interested in because in these offers, because I was happy. I am happy with my new position, and I would regularly get messages saying, "Do you want to work for us in this Golang enterprise?" And I would just say, "Thank you, I'm not interested. I'm happy with my position." But one of the messages, out of the blue, was, "Hello, we are a book publishing company, and we are looking for a technical editor for a book we are publishing. Would you consider this? It's about Go." And I said, "Well, probably, yeah, sure." And then I spoke with them. This is Manning. I spoke with them, and they said that they had also different opportunities for other books. So I forwarded them Aliénor's contact, and she is reviewing a book, I think.
Yeah, it's published now. Yeah, it's called Shipping Go, and it's about how you can, while you read the book, you go from writing a hello world to pushing it all the way to the cloud and deploying it in production. It's by Joel Holmes.
So this is the Manning Publishing Company. And after a while, we decided that, well, we had chats with them regularly, and we opened the door for writing a book ourselves. Something we wanted to do that appeared, because we discovered that actually people write books. They don't appear out of the blue in your shelf. It's a work people do. And we suggested we would write a book, and they accepted the suggestion. And so
It was actually the other way around, nearly. Someone from Manning said we have this series of tiny something projects. So they have C, they have probably Python and C++ and a lot of other languages, and we need one for Go. Do you want to write it? So the original title was Tiny Go Project, but Tiny Go is actually a compiler for Go, so it made no sense. And now we looked for a word for this. The fact that all of the projects that you can learn throughout the book are small enough that you can go through them without taking an entire day. And as Donia and I are both interested in sewing, and I like to create skirts with pockets because it's not a thing that exists out in the wild, we put this pockets word inside and insisted quite heavily with the editor to keep that word. They suggested a lot of other stuff, and we really want this pocket word because it's kind of, friendlier.
It is friendly, and it seems to go right along with, you can see the little gopher in a pocket, and it just makes you want to pick it up and hug it and keep it safe.
And the writing of the book is a very long process, but one of the steps that was a very important step for us was choosing a cover for the book.
Oh, yeah.
And we were offered 3 different illustrations, and in one of them had a woman with a basket, and in the basket she had chicken. It was amazing. It looked great. It looked nice, and we wanted that one and not the other ones, because the other ones had things we didn't want to see on the cover of the book.
We can add that I have hens, and I actually built a project to monitor my hen house that I presented last year to Gopher conferences. So we really want to have hens if we can. And also we have a Tiny Go project at the end, the Tiny Go chapter, at the end of the book. So it was nice to just relate the Tiny Go project that I wrote and the hens. The behind story.
And now we are in the difficult part of actually writing the book, which is you have to put words together to build chapters.
As somebody who has never written a book before, I always thought it was super easy to write book. You sit down 2 days and you have a next book ready. But you're telling me it's not the case.
No, I think it's easy to write a book. The problem is, if you want people to read it, it has to be a good book, an interesting book. And we write the book together in a Google document, and then we read each other's parts, and we say, well, this is not clear enough, or we need to build a story about this part, otherwise just technical details. How do we make it interesting, and how do we build it in a way that it is understandable by readers, and that it teaches what we want to teach, and that we can bring value to people who buy the book.
And since I'm a very impulsive person and I want to buy your book, how can I do that? How can I get my hands on the chapters and material right now, this very second?
You need to go to the Manning's website and find Learn Go with Pocket projects, and then you can either get the PDF version or pre-order the real physical book, or both of them. But in any case, you get access to the live book where you can get the code directly, you can comment, and we will respond. So it's like you can give us the feedback as it goes.
That's because you're in the progress of writing this right now. So this
Exactly, yes.
it's part of the MEEP, which is the Manning Early Access Program, I believe, right?
Yes, correct. Manning is the publisher.
So how is it actually fielding input from readers as you write? I didn't have that when I did Simple Python. I had a swarm of editors I handpicked from the technical community who always disagreed with me. I'm like, here, edit this. But I didn't have any readers beyond that going through that editing process. What is it like getting feedback from readers as you go?
So the first thing you want to know, well, the first thing they ask you when you want to write a technical book is, who's going to read it? And this is the first question you need to answer. You need to decide who your target audience is. And based on that, this publisher will pick people with that kind of background. So if you want people who are very experienced, they will pick experienced people. If you want people who are less experienced, they will pick less experienced people. And that means that the comments these people make will be aligned with the target audience you wanted to aim at.
Right.
So we are getting feedback from people. So the book is targeting people who have little experience of Go or little experience of working in a company. And we want to use our background and our history and our knowledge of past experiences to show good practices when you work in a company of, testing is not an optional activity, it's a mandatory activity. Documentation is important. And not only because someone tells you it's important, because you can actually use the Go tool to get documentation from your code. Go doc something will give you the documentation that you wrote. If you didn't write anything, it will just output nothing. So the feedback we get is always accurate because it means that someone who is not we are aiming at people who don't have a lot of experience. So if someone says, I don't understand this is important feedback for us because it means we didn't describe it well enough. And if someone says, but I think, you got the best feedback ever, so you can explain it. The one you got from someone who said, I used to work in Java and I moved to Go, and your book has...
Yeah, there's one person who's really active in the comment section of the live book. And so he was pointing out a lot of typos and all of the things that you keep in your manuscripts that should not go to printing. And some of the comments were really interesting. So I found him on LinkedIn. I said, is it you? Because, have to stalk people a bit. And now we're having this conversation about what do you need? Do you like this chapter? Do you want something that's more cloud-oriented or service or CLI-oriented? And people are giving us the things that they actually need so that we can address their needs. And also, the sense of community is alive because it's Go and people are all kind, roughly.
That sounds like an amazing process, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Including that, I come from a Java background, and having someone say, I used to do Java and now I'm in Go and I like your book because it makes me want to do Go. I'm like, yay! Gophers everywhere. Gopher mopping.
They hear the tiny cheers off in the background. There.
Yes.
So shifting a little bit towards code itself, you all have a fair bit of experience with coding. You know, you told me earlier that you used to work at the same company together, and now you all work at different companies. So I'm sure you've all seen your share of bugs, weird bugs. What, from each of you, what is one bug that you remember that was just like it was particularly puzzling, or it was just a hilarious outcome, or what was it? What's a favorite bug for each of you that you've encountered in your work?
I would like to mention one that was from the early days where everyone was learning Go in the project, because it's hard to find, especially 5-6 years ago, it was hard to find Go developers. So nobody who worked on our project was really a Go person. And one of them was we were trying to decode some JSON. And JSON needs... So in Go, you can expose your fields or choose to keep them to yourself, like private, public in other languages. And in order for the JSON decoder package to fill up the fields, you need them to be exposed. And we didn't realize that. So the code was trying to decode some JSON into a Go structure, but did not have access to the fields, so it would not do anything. And you're like, what's going on? There's nothing. I do have the right tags, so the JSON, you're checking all of the strings one by one, and checking why is my Go structure still nothing, until we realized the mistake. And that's a good way to learn, I think.
If I were to pick a bug, I'm not going to choose Go, because I think the most funny bug I've seen was in C. So I was using C for a project a long time ago, and C has a very limited set of types you can use in string or characters, not strings, integers, but C does not have any Boolean type, so you need to fake a Boolean type. And in order to fake a Boolean type, someone declared two constants. One of them was going to be true and the other one was going to be false. And what they did was to declare in a file, the constant true was going to be 0 and false was going to be 1. And unfortunately, this means that if a function was returning true, it would just return true in the code. But if you would test the output of that function in an if clause, the test would be if what you expect is true, but if 0, and if 0 in C does not go where you want to go. So everywhere we had to add equal true to make the code work, which is just a pain, just because someone had decided to use true equals 0 and false equals 1.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
I have a funny one when we were at Airbus about Mongo. So we were using the driver from MongoDB, and so we were building a software that was doing satellite image processing. So you basically ask a zone on the planet, I can say, on the Earth, and it will display the images if they are available. And so we were storing in MongoDB images with we called it area of interest, like a bounding box of the zone that you wanted to have. But the fact is, correct me if I'm wrong, Aliénor and Pascal, but the fact when you were asking between a zone between minus 180 and the other border plus 180, you couldn't get this zone because it was like kind of separated in MongoDB. Was it that?
Yeah, it's that.
Okay.
MongoDB does not circle around the globe. It starts at minus 180 and starts at plus 180, and that's it.
One question. What's happening with Go and garbage collector there?
I don't have much to say, except that we've got one. So, contrary to C and C++, you don't have to deal with the memory leaking and stuff. We have a garbage collector, and it works.
So, Go as a compiler language and deals with memory, and the way Go deals with memory is that we have a garbage collector, and the garbage collector is something that runs in the background. We usually don't call the garbage collector. We can call the garbage collector if we want to, but that's very uncommon. But recently, for the release of, I think it was Go 119, there was a very nice talk at the GophCon in Berlin showing how the Go garbage collector was dealing with reallocating memory cleaning the unused memory, but also reallocating memory and making sure it was running at the best time. And there is a new variable you can set so that Go makes best use of the memory and does not run the garbage collector every time. The problem with the garbage collector in every language is that it stops the execution at some point, cleans the unused memory, and then resumes the program. And if this happens too often, then your program is going to be very laggy. And one of the ways of circumventing this is to make sure that the garbage collector does not run too often. And for this, you need to understand how the garbage collector works. In Go, the garbage collector basically works every time you allocate new memory, the threshold for the garbage collector to run is going to be at twice that memory being used. But if you often allocate memory at the beginning of your program, that's going to be very often. What they did in 119 was to introduce a new variable, which was, well, don't run the garbage collector unless we hit this value. And this means that you don't care about running the garbage collector too often. It just runs when you need it to run.
That's very nice.
So, what is one thing that you know now that you wish you had known when you started with Go?
Well, I think when we started with Go at Airbus, we were using a previous version of Go, so maybe it's a good idea to speak about the versions of Go. First of all, Go currently is, if you download Go and install Go, it's going to use version 1.20. And there's a small bug about this, which I'll cover later. But for the last 7 iterations, Go has been handling dependencies in a specific way, with something called modules. Before that, Go was handling dependencies with something called vendors, which would basically say, you have a project, you have dependencies, okay, I will download your dependencies and put them, the source code, in the vendors directory. And dealing with vendors was a pain, because every time you needed to work on a new branch or new code or a new project, you would download everything all in all again, and that was tedious. With Go packaging, Go modules, which were introduced 3 years ago now, maybe 4, there's a cache, basically, a local cache for all your projects of all the dependencies you might have. And this makes working with Go simpler because you don't have this weird vendors project that contains specific things for Go. It also means that Go has this. So first of all, Go has a backwards compatibility convention. Everything running in Go 1 is always going to be able to run in Go 1. Some of the functions might be deprecated, but they are still there, and you can still use them. It's not like Python 2 or Python 3. It has been announced that Go will never have a version 2. So anything running in Go will always run in Go. And you don't need to care about specific versions unless you want a specific feature that is implemented in subversion. But for the reason of vendors, one of the funny things about Go is a vendors directory, a directory called vendors, is going to have a specific meaning in Go, which is, this is a directory in which Go will expect to find source code from other repositories. So the rule is you should never call a directory vendors in Go, otherwise things might happen. And this is something that at the beginning, I think we made some mistakes with not calling things vendors, but just removing the vendors altogether because we didn't add code in there.
It can be surprising if you don't know to look for it. How are you, Donia?
I think that the interface philosophy about Go is something that I learned along the way. I've been doing some Java in between, and it's completely different. In Go, interfaces are declared where you use them, like where your user is actually using them. And where in Java, it's the opposite, sorry. So I wish I learned more about interfaces at the beginning, but when I was learning Go, everyone was learning Go at the same time on this new project. So it makes sense today for me to just like understanding more and more the philosophy about interfaces in my day-to-day. But even though sometimes I'm like, when we're writing about the book, I'm like, where are we declaring this interface here? I'm not sure. I'm like just going through the process of who is going to use it and where are we going to declare it. So yeah, maybe Aliénor, you want to add something, or Pascal, about interface?
I think interfaces is something I should have come up with, but I'm glad you did.
Okay.
How about you, Aliénor? What's something that you wish you had known about Go at the beginning?
You mentioned interfaces, right?
Yeah.
How they are implicit. I think I'm learning stuff about it every day, especially generics, but they didn't exist back then.
Generics are Go's version of templates in C++. Basically.
And it's very new.
Yeah, it allows polymorphisms and that kind of buzzwords.
So it's interesting, something that hasn't come up this whole conversation, except I alluded to a couple of times, but Go is famous at this point, I think, for concurrency and working really well with concurrency. Have you done a lot of work with it in that capacity, or is that more like PR than like a huge thing that you're gonna see every time?
To me, it works on the low levels. Like if you're writing a service, then your requests will be concurrently coming in, but you don't use it every day.
I do. I have a service that needs to get information from 10 of the services, or maybe I get a request that creates 10 different things and I need to work on every different item of these lists. And I can call the different services in parallel. And in Go, the way you say this line should be run in parallel is just by prefixing it with Go. And that's it. If you start your line with Go space something will be run in parallel. You don't need to know what pthread is, for instance.
So do you have to worry about the usual things like deadlocking, live locking, and mutexes and all that?
Yeah, you need to take care of that. But the way you communicate between processes, threads, or routines in Go is through something called channels in Go, which is a specific type for Go. You just send messages from one end to another end. Someone is listening and someone is writing. This is something not very low level, but not very commonly used in a day-to-day activity. But it's how the pools of workers work, basically. They use channels to communicate.
I can add something. There are like Go proverbs about Go. It says about concurrency, don't communicate by sharing memory, share memory by communicating, meaning use channel. Concurrency is not parallelism. We know that it's different.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And channels orchestrate, mutexes serialize. So it's a good summary about like concurrency in Go and how you can use like the different things.
Well, I think it says something when I was writing the chapter concurrency in Dead Simple Python. I actually went back to Rob Pike and Go to really wrap my head, because I hadn't done a lot of concurrency prior to that, because I simply didn't need it in the projects I had worked on. And so when I sat down to write, the chapter on that for Python, it was, fairly new concept for me. I had like the very basic understanding, but not enough to write code. So I had to go back and understand it. And there's a lot of good things I will say about Python, but I will not compliment their documentation regarding concurrency and parallelism. Not by any means. So I actually went back to Rob Pike and Go, and that was my first exposure to the language, was actually researching up for a Python book and understanding how concurrency even worked. And so it was really eye-opening for me when he said, concurrency is not parallelism, because I have heard my whole life those two terms being used interchangeably. And for some Python coders, I've been the first person to explain, like in the context of that language, that no, they're different. And it's actually a blessing in disguise that a language like Python doesn't allow you to do multiprocessing automatically on top of threading because it forces you to separate the two concerns out. You can't just get free parallelism with every concurrency. You have to think about which one do I need, why do I need it, and how do I want to implement it. But that said, those channels sound very useful because in Python you have to implement a lot of that plumbing yourself.
Yeah, it gives you all the tools that you need, and then you need to know how to use them and make the best of them.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been great to learn more about Go. It's a language I've heard a ton about and haven't really encountered much of in the wild yet. And, hearing about what makes Go special definitely makes me want to try it out and get to know it better.
We've enjoyed this.
That's good news.
That's great. We would be happy if you want to start with our book.
Yes, definitely.
Seems like a very good place to start.
Well, first you need to pick one of the gophers up and bring it back home. But yeah, you need a gopher, at least a plushy toy.
Yes. Well, can I take one of the live gophers, or would they be incensed?
Oh, not very kind, but ask them. Maybe they want it.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to do that. I mean, there's about, what is it, like 80 gophers around here?
There's a yellow one over there, look.
Oh yeah, you're right. Then there's that one over there wearing the cowboy hat and the feather boa. That's kind of cute. Yeah, I'm surprised the pythons have been getting along as well with the gophers as they have been.
We don't have to eat each other in this world.
We can all get along.
Well, it has been a delight having you here. You have been absolutely wonderful guests. And hopefully we get to meet again soon.
Thank you. That was very, very cool to be here today with you in this coffee. Thank you.
The tea was delicious. Thank you very much.
Blue tea. I'm going to have to try that now.
Yeah.
Burgunder's Café, this is Jess. Yes, of course, we're open 24/7 at Burgunder's Café. You can also find us on LinkedIn and on Mastodon as Burgunder's Café at hackyderm.io. Well, the music is provided by audionautics.com. We have a link on our website. You're looking for a gopher? Yes, we have a few around. Can you describe it? Blue? Yes, and small. Fudgy. Unfortunately, I can see about 78 gophers matching that description right now. Well, why didn't you say so in the first place? Kovo ba Flandrina.